To me, it seems that making the right choice in love is one of the most important aspects. These moments of clarity are often fleeting, ranging from seconds to a couple of years or 3 years at most. However, it is crucial in a relationship because, as Don Quixote said, he who does not hit the mark in love misses all. In other words, if one makes a mistake in the effective choice, they will be completely unhappy. This choice usually happens once in a lifetime. Therefore, when someone says they've been married 4 times, it's clear they haven't improved their decision-making even with experience. So, what happens with the issue of making the right choice? The first step is usually marked by a feeling, a spark, a love at first sight, a revelation. One becomes blind, impacted, and there's a physical attraction in men and a psychological one in women. Something is discovered, illuminated between the individuals. It's even a physical sensation, what we call the butterfly in Spain. Suddenly there's interest, a desire to get to know that person. They seem special, and then comes the second phase, which 90% of people skip. Engaging their intellect. This phase can last from seconds to minutes, hours, days, months, or even years. It's during this phase that one should ask themselves if it's beneficial to fall in love with this person. Clearly, there's something there, but one isn't madly in love yet. Maybe it's too early as we've just met. Is it beneficial to fall in love with this person who is separated and has 3 children? They might be on the verge of divorce, but is it certain they will separate because of me? I remember a conversation with a doctor at the hospital. She called me one day during my shift and said she found the love of her life, madly in love with a fantastic doctor who was about to divorce. I advised against rushing into this relationship, considering the complexities involved, especially with children. A year later, she hadn't separated from her husband, and she was heartbroken, but still madly in love. She didn't engage her intellect at the right moment. It's crucial to engage the intellect because beliefs, lifestyle preferences, and future plans must align for a successful relationship. Love can be blind when it arrives, but when it fades, clarity sets in. It's important to analyze, evaluate, inquire, and truly know the other person before falling madly in love, because once you do, there's no turning back. Understanding the other person's likes, hobbies, family background, and values is essential. It's not about rejecting someone based on their family, but one should remember they are not marrying the other person's family. As my father, a doctor, always says, love, when it comes, can be very blind, but when it goes, it's very clear. People tell me that about Goya and the mind, and then when I have already evaluated and used my intellect, made pros and cons, I tell the truth that this person suits me, shares my values, fits into my life project, and we have a similar lifestyle. The next step is to see if I fall completely in love with this person. Some people experience that suddenly. They say it's perfect, but the spark doesn't ignite. I don't know what happens, the second step doesn't come. But the person, the third step after that analysis, one says, let me try to fall in love. This process I'm describing can happen all in one night. They meet, feel the spark, do a thorough examination, check off the list, and ticks all the boxes, everything makes sense, and they fall in love in the early hours of the morning. The next day, they say, but generally, it lasts a bit longer. We should try to make it last longer. Sometimes it halts. People tell me they found a great person for them, but they're not in love. I say, well, with how bad the market is, maybe you should nurture this relationship and see if love develops. Perhaps it doesn't have to be as sudden as you expected. It could be a love of feelings and also a very thoughtful love. There are different speeds. Sometimes the woman meets a guy and she's already planning their life together, while the guy is still thinking about having a barbecue with friends the next day. She's moving at one speed and he feels overwhelmed. That's why I tell women not to reveal too much, even if they saw their future husband on the day they met. Don't say it because men run away. However, I recently met a very good girl through some friends who told me she had met a guy who was a close friend of mine, and she said, I know I'm going to marry this guy. I asked her not to tell him that because it might scare him off. I think you could make a good couple, but don't say it. Indeed, they started dating, and she called me saying she's not sure if he's interested. Probably he doesn't like me. I told her to stop calling him, don't text him, don't reply. If he doesn't see anything, he's not worth it. They're not officially together yet, but women are smart and men easily get overwhelmed. The fourth step is the will. We start with a feeling, use our intellect, go back to the feeling, and then the will, as the doctor says, is the icing on the cake. Feelings are a fluctuating inner landscape. You don't feel the same about your mother every day. One day, you think she's wonderful, and the next day, you might think it's better not to call her. That doesn't mean you end the relationship with your mother. You don't love your children the same every day either, but you don't abandon them because one day they annoy you. Likewise, in romantic relationships, it can't be perfect every day because feelings change constantly. Some days you love your job, some days you hate it, some days you love your boss, some days you can't stand them. But that doesn't mean you quit your job because you can't stand your boss one day. The same goes for relationships. There are days you're not thrilled, and there are days you are. But that doesn't mean you end everything because there's a desire to fight for that relationship. You put in the will. Loving is desiring. It's a decision you make to love despite bad days, despite challenging moments. For this, two things are necessary psychologically and psychiatrically. One, the person must be, in quotes, lovable. If a person doesn't allow themselves to be loved, no matter how much effort one puts in, that relationship can't work. People often tell me about Goya and the intellect, and when I've already evaluated and used my intelligence, weighing the pros and cons, I honestly say, this person is right for me. They share my values, fit into my life plan, and we have a similar lifestyle. The next step is to see if I fall completely in love with this person. Sometimes people find someone perfect, but the spark doesn't ignite. I'm not sure what happens, why the second step doesn't happen, but then the third step comes after that analysis. One decides to try falling in love. What I'm describing can happen all in one night. They meet, feel that spark, conduct a thorough examination, make a list of pros and cons, analyze everything, and say, it's worth it, it suits me. They haven't lied or deceived me. I'm in love by dawn, and the next day I confirm it. Generally, this process lasts a bit longer, and efforts are made to make it last longer. Sometimes it pauses. People tell me they found a great person, but they're not in love yet. I tell them, given the current market, maybe you should nurture this relationship and see if love grows. It doesn't have to be an instant spark. It could be a gradual, thoughtful love. There are different speeds at which people experience love. A woman might meet a man and she's already planning a barbecue with friends the next day while he's still thinking about other things. This discrepancy can cause issues. I advise women not to reveal their certainty about the relationship too soon. For instance, I recently met a woman who said she knew a guy she would marry. I asked her not to tell him immediately because men tend to get scared off by such declarations. The fourth step is willpower. We start with a feeling, engage our intellect, go back to the feeling, and then it's about willpower. As my doctor friend says, the jewel in the crown, the cherry on top. Feelings are an ever-changing inner landscape. Some days we adore our mothers, other days we're distant. It's the same with children. We love them every day, but there are days we might be upset with them. In relationships, it can't always be perfect because feelings fluctuate. We might love our job one day and hate it the next, but that doesn't mean we quit because of one bad day. Similarly, in relationships, there are ups and downs, but the desire to fight for the relationship is crucial. It takes two things psychologically. The person must be open to love, and there must be a willingness to love despite bad days or tough moments. I always recommend people figure out what they're looking for. For example, I have a good friend who's met 6 guys in the past year whom she theoretically loved but hadn't fallen for. She's sensible and wonderful, but when I sat down with her and listed their names and characteristics, it was clear they were all very different. I told her she wants a boyfriend, but doesn't know what she truly wants. I often ask single patients, what are you looking for? It's crucial to know, even if it's tough, not to have clarity. The other person might want religious values, certain personal qualities, or specific ambitions. Knowing this helps avoid mismatched expectations. There's a difference between settling and being selective. When people ask me if I believe in finding the one, I say it depends on how selective you are. For someone who's not picky, there could be many potential partners. But for someone selective, there might be only one ideal match or a handful of close matches. The level of selectiveness can change with age, but it's important not to rush or settle out of fear of being single. Many people rush into relationships in their late 30s out of fear, but it's better to take time and find the right fit. Firstly, what often happens is that suddenly, 4 years later, we realize we didn't know each other well enough. He was very obsessive, and I didn't allow myself to be treated that way. It's incredibly painful at that moment when a person has clear ideas about what they want, but hasn't found it. My third piece of advice is not to get overwhelmed too soon. About 3 or 4 months ago, I was in Mexico for a conference with about 1,000 girls aged 14 to 16 about how to fall in love at this age without getting hurt. Around 30 girls wrote to me asking, "We can't find anyone with our values and we'll be single for 15 years. I tell them not to get overwhelmed so early. It's okay to feel a bit overwhelmed after 40, but at 15, if you stay single for life because you haven't found someone, it's too soon to worry." My third recommendation would be to avoid just trying things out. It's not about saying, "I'll try this person because if I don't, maybe love won't happen." If you try, perhaps love will blossom. But what's the problem with trying? You might develop affection, and it's very hard to end a relationship when there's affection but no love. I have a friend who, when she was with a guy, called me and said, "How do I break up now? I love his family so much. They treat me well when I visit." She couldn't bring herself to break up even though she hasn't been in love since the beginning. There's so much affection there, and I couldn't cut ties. So I often warn people about trying things out because breakups involve a lot of pain, tears, Kleenex, and moments of sadness. Be careful with this. Fourthly, work on willpower in everything. From the very beginning, pay attention to small details, constantly trying to please the other person, asking yourself, what can I do to make them happy? As I mentioned earlier, one of the most crucial aspects for a relationship to work is understanding the other person. When I say understanding, I mean men and women are not the same. I gave a funny example in Spain about a monologue called The Caveman that hasn't reached Chile, as far as I know. It explains how cavemen and cavewomen were different. Cavemen only hunted, but in the 21st century, men don't just hunt. Women gather information, opinions, and everything they want. Men and women are different, and we have to accept and understand that. I always thought if psychiatry didn't work out for me, I'd set up a little place to teach men and women about this so that couples could function better. As a fifth point, I would discuss the topic of sexuality, which I find incredibly important. Today, sexuality is analyzed, especially in young relationships. It's amazing how any advertisement can relate to it. I had learned a bit of Creole because I had a translator with me. Suddenly, I found myself talking alone with one of the girls, and I asked her, "How long have you been here?" She told me, "I'm 10 years old." I asked her how she felt, and she said, "Sometimes I envy the luck that women from rich countries have, because you can choose who you want to have your first sexual experience with. For me, there are 500 or 1,000 clients passing through here, but the one I dream about every night and the one that marked me the most is the first one I haven't seen." It made me think about how nowadays, especially in the United States, there's pressure to analyze the first sexual experience as something to lose as soon as possible. There's a study from American universities showing that since sex has become so disposable in college life, leading to constant hookups, it's causing depression among students. Americans tend to swing from one extreme to another easily, and now there's a movement in the US encouraging people not to engage in relationships and to learn to wait. It's been observed that young people having many casual, non-committal relationships are experiencing feelings of emptiness, suicidal thoughts, sadness, and a loss of dignity in their sexual experiences. Sex has become purely about pleasure, leaving people feeling hollow. Another day, a lady and scientist who published this study said, "I recommend the opposite, that people learn to love and value that love shouldn't be about using and discarding. One cannot seek a sexual relationship in these casual hookups." A patient of mine who has been coming to my clinic for about 2 years told me a story. A very beautiful girl came to see me because she had just been discharged from the hospital for pancreatitis, and her digestive doctor told her that her problem was psychiatric. We started discussing her history, and she told me that every time she gets a boyfriend, she tells him, "I don't want commitment. Don't worry. You have me for whatever you want. If you want to have sex, we can. If you want to just be together, I don't want you to feel pressured. Just do what you want, when you want." After a series of sexual relationships with her, The guy would eventually take her out for dinner, and after a month, 2 months, or 3 months, he would leave her. She would then spiral into depression and somatize into pancreatitis, ending up hospitalized. She said, "I think I need to change the way I treat guys. But what am I doing wrong? If I tell them they can do whatever they want with me, why am I still ending up in this situation?" I told her, "From now on, as long as you're my patient, you cannot have sexual relationships without my consent." She said, "Then I'll never have a boyfriend again. But we'll see." I've noted her case in my mental Excel sheet among the single patients as someone not yet paired up. She started to understand why, but she said, "Marie Ann, what you're telling me is that change the entire vision I have of women. For all my friends, everyone, if you don't tell her to be a boy that same night, they already think you're a weird chick. You're a city that values itself, a person who has a high degree of self-worth." So I remind you, I recommend everyone to know how to wait for the moment, the person, the big regrets. Someone asked me in one of the questions in the colloquium, these people who feel so guilty when they end a relationship, when one delves into consultations, sitting with paper and getting into the intimacy and the depths of the other person's thoughts, asking them why they feel so bad, why with that first boyfriend or girlfriend or that person, I gave them something they didn't want, right? I rushed into things I shouldn't have done, and all that surfaces. What happens is that the society we live in, the society of hurry, all this is suppressed so as not to think, right? So the important thing would be, if they leave you, go to Cuba, because there are wonderful Cubans or Cuban women. So it's very important that everyone has a healthy and orderly sexuality in their head and knows how far they want to go, because they want to, what's right, what's wrong, what makes them feel good or bad. Nowadays, it's being seen that people who have experienced sexual abuse in childhood, which is a very high percentage. I was working in London in a hospital, and many patients, and it's a topic that I ask about after a few consultations when I see strange things, and they told me that officially in England, 20% of the population has been abused in childhood, and it's a recognized 20%, which I assume is much higher. Abuse always comes out throughout life, leading to depression. Studies explain that even hypertension, diabetes, recurrent depression, all kinds of diseases, people have problems, and I'll tell you a last anecdote, then you can ask questions. A few months ago, a patient started coming to the clinic. She works in a ministry, she's doing well, she has a husband, they have 2 biological children and 2 adopted ones. She has a lot of anxiety, then she brings her to us, and we start asking her questions, and she starts admitting that she washes her hands 30 times a day, that she cleans the sheets and washes them over and over, that if the maid who works in the house touches the youngest child's clothes, she puts them back in the washing machine, that she needs to check everything 1,000 times. Well, what we call obsessive compulsive disorder. I explained to her that she has an obsessive compulsive disorder. It's hard for her to accept it. She says that washing her hands 30 times a day is normal, that it's not a problem, and if it's gas or something else, she doesn't want to admit it at some point. Today, I start to inquire and ask her to explain how her childhood was, and she tells me that at 15, 16 years old, she had a boyfriend who wanted to have sex, and she wasn't sure if she wanted it or not. She was never comfortable with the first sexual relations with this boy, and since that day, she feels so dirty that she needs to shower at least 5 times a day. We find out through her whole story that everything starts there, and now she has a very established obsessive-compulsive personality. But it all starts from a boyfriend she wasn't sure about at 15, 16 years old. Therefore, sexuality is a very important issue that should not be overlooked. To finish, so you can ask all the questions you want, knowing that today is the last day the doctor is here, choose wisely, have clear ideas, but a lot of prudence. Attraction is sometimes so strong that nothing can stop it, therefore educating that intelligence, and will, learning to educate the gaze, attraction, impulse, know how. Not just because if one doesn't learn to educate it from a young age, when suddenly after being married for 20 years, that amazing secretary appears out of nowhere, which always happens when one is in a marital crisis, if one doesn't know how to control that impulse one has. And to finish, I would like to say that deep inside every person there are hidden treasures that only love reveals. Therefore, it's important to give that love a great opportunity